started hearing footsteps again, getting faster and louder as it approached, and the ungodly screech. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak anymore. I suddenly heard a big sound like something colliding and saw lights flickering everywhere. And all of a sudden, the light stopped moving.
No, tell us what happened.
My friend Scott and I, we were planning a full day of hiking and camping to end the summer together. We set up our tents far enough from the trail so as not to be disturbed but safe. As we set up the tents early, we decided to explore while we had a bit of daylight left. Came across this stream not far from the camp, so we had a little snack there and just sat and chatted for a while. The sun started to set, so we picked up our things and headed back to camp for the night. Have you ever felt like someone or something was watching you? That's exactly how I felt on our way back to camp. Maybe some animal took interest in us. We have to make sure we keep our food safely stored, is all I could think. When we came back to the camp, I couldn't hear any more noise. Surely whatever was following us felt bored and left. I asked Scott if he'd heard anything while we were coming back, but he didn't. We went ahead and ate, making sure to clean up everything properly before settling down for the night. We got used to sleeping in separate tents, pitching them a few feet apart, as I tend to snore quite badly, which Scott used to playfully complain about. We talked for a little while and then zipped up our tents to sleep. 5 or so minutes later, after the chat, I heard a sound. It sounded like something was walking around the camp. We made sure to pack the food away carefully, so whatever it is, we'll probably soon lose interest. I was just laying still, trying to listen for anything odd, but the sound just became more noticeable, and it was weird. The rhythm of the sound, it felt like someone was circling the camp. It got louder and louder, like it was approaching, and I was sure now these were footsteps. Before I could act, these steps stopped a few feet away at most from our tents. I had no idea what it was, so I just grabbed my survival knife, my flashlight. I was ready for anything that might happen. I waited, keeping still to hear any changes or advances from whatever it was. The silence felt like an eternity, and then I could hear someone whispering. It started and stopped every few seconds. I could hear the voice say, "Help me." I was literally paralyzed with fear. I heard Scott moving in his tent all of a sudden, and I could see the glow of his flashlight hitting my tent. I heard him repeat, "Who's there?" a few times before he talked to me. He asked if I was awake. I said yes. He asked if I had heard something, but I cut him off mid-sentence. "Something's there." I heard him get out of the tent, and I went to turn my flashlight on before hearing the same whispering voice again. This time it said, "Thank you." I started hearing footsteps again, getting faster and louder as it approached, and the ungodly screech. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak anymore. I suddenly heard a big sound like something colliding and saw lights flickering everywhere. And all of a sudden, the light stopped moving. It was on the floor. I couldn't call Scott. I just couldn't. My voice was gone. A few seconds later, I heard it again. "Help me. Help me." And then the awful stench hit me. It was almost like the smell of something rotten, burning. I began to weep uncontrollably in silence. I knew something had happened to Scott, but I couldn't move. I never felt this powerless in my entire life. The night went on. I kept trembling the whole time, knife in hand. No lights on, fearful that would make me noticeable to whatever was out there. Sometimes the whispering stopped for a few minutes before it started again. I kept hearing footsteps walking slowly around the camp. As the sun started to rise, the whispers became less and less noticeable. I couldn't hear the footsteps as distinctly, and soon couldn't hear anything at all. As soon as the sun completely was out, I slowly unzipped my tent and started looking around. I saw Scott's body immediately. I rushed to him and started crying, looking around, afraid that the thing was still there waiting for me. Scott began to move and I yelled out so hard. He asked me what was happening. I couldn't understand. I asked him what happened during the night and he couldn't remember anything, or why he was out here lying in the middle of the camp. I recalled the colliding sounds I could hear and checked Scott for any injuries. There was a little cut on his head and it bled a little bit, but the blood was already dark and dry. I helped him stand up and noticed a weird kind of mark on the back of his neck though. It didn't look like scratches, but I didn't want him to panic and tell him what happened, so I kept silent and told him we should just go home. He asked me why, but I just said I wasn't feeling really good at the time and asked him to pack. We got out of there as fast as possible and walked back to my car. It was close to nighttime, so we packed everything in the car and started driving back home. We were driving for maybe 20 minutes before it was dark again. Scott was talking to me about funny stuff he had seen lately on some videos, but I just couldn't focus on what he was saying. It felt like I had muffled hearing. I could not shake the horror that I had witnessed the night before. He went on, and I gave a slight nods to what he was telling me. He kept reaching back on his head, scratching or something. I kept focusing on the road as much as I could, but I suddenly couldn't hear Scott talking anymore. I asked him if he's okay, and he was looking out his window, scratching the mark on his neck. I focused back on the road and said, "Scott, you're okay?"